I read somewhere that they're not interested in people that are diseased. Is that true? Do they like just leave those people, like they're only looking for really healthy specimens? Is that true?
I don't know. That's not quite clear because there are some people with disabilities who are abductees,
Okay.
and if we assume that one of their purposes is making babies, then you might be in a wheelchair. You still got ovaries.
Uh-huh.
So,
But like, for example, they wouldn't abduct someone who has AIDS because that would be a disease.
I don't know. I don't know. That is a really interesting question. I'm going to keep that question in mind.
Okay.
That's very
I also wanted to ask you about these reptilians because I had an experience of a reptilian, and I'm not quite sure what it's about, and I have no memories of ever being abducted from by aliens, and I had this weird experience, and I've talked about it, and I'll say it real brief because the listeners have heard it before. But I woke up one night, and there was this tall lizard, standing at the end of my bed, and it freaked me out. But I wasn't like, people were like, well, were you out of the room? And it didn't freak me out enough for it to make me bolt. But I rolled over, I turned on the radio, and this weird language kept coming out of the radio that I'd never have recognized before. And when I did wake up, the interesting thing was he was right by the closet, or she, I don't know. And I think I startled it as much as it startled me. And our friend Nick, who is into the UFO, he asked me questions. Like he said, well, was it by a closet? And I'm like, yeah. And he said, well, they use those as portals. And I was like, oh. And we had been up on an investigation where this guy claimed that UFOs had been visiting him repeatedly. And I'm just wondering, did I bring one of them back with me, you think? Do they think they were like, well, what's this girl all about? Why is she here? And just checking in on me?
Amy, what I think you should do is contact an organ. What state are you in? Where do you live?
Michigan.
Michigan. All right. Contact me and an organization called Opus, OPUS, and they have a roster of medically trained hypnotherapists. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Hypnosis is a very benign. I'm not saying you're going to like what you might find out. Might.
Yeah, I don't know if
I'm
I
not
want to
saying
find
that
it out.
the story is necessarily benign, but the process of hypnosis is benign. It's not to where you lose control of yourself. What the hypnotherapist does is put you in a state of deep relaxation. And when that happens, your mind is able to remember things that normally you don't remember. It's quite interesting. You wouldn't know necessarily that a state of deep relaxation will cause a memory to come back. But I think you owe it to yourself to find out the duration of this memory is what? Just like a couple minutes?
Yeah.
All you remember, right?
Well, I mean, I actually woke up to it, and it was standing there, and I was startled, and I got the feeling it was startled, and it just kind of disappeared. And then because when music and stuff helps me fall back to sleep, and I rolled over and turned on the radio, and there was this weird language coming out of and it was repeating itself. I could tell it was repeating itself because it was the same.
So
it was
like a loop.
4 or 5 words. Yeah, it was like a loop.
Yeah, right.
Have you heard of such a thing?
They use all kinds of special effects, shall we say, coming on over your radio or your TV or your stereo. We have many accounts of that, to where they just come
the
through.
Reptilians, Nick said the Reptilians are the bad bunch. Like, you don't mess with them. And I'm like, not happy that I had a reptilian.
Sure. That makes complete sense to me, honey. I really understand that. And what I think you want to do is to find a real good, reputable hypnotherapist without an agenda. Who doesn't going to try to convince you of anything, which none of them should do if they're reputable. And commit yourself for a few $100s to have a few sessions with them to explore this event and see, because I would think that under hypnosis you'll remember more about what happened that night.
Oh, so something could have, like they could have been placing me back in my bed.
Yeah, that could have been the end of an experience. It could have been the beginning. In other words, I would think there's more to it than what you recall.
Can you tell us a little bit about the reptilians and why they seem to be different than the grays? And
I have never put too much emphasis on what they look like. It's quite unknown to us what the significance of what they might look like is. What's the significance of it? The reptilians, so-called reptilians, some people say they're in charge, and
yeah, because in that book, Jim goes to meet. I wrote that down, that he went to go meet the reptilians after he had submitted.
Quite so. One thing he said in that book about the reptilians was that their hands were very clumsy, and if they are real, if they are real physical beings and not illusions, then that means that they don't do any manual work. They can't even turn dials on computers because their hands are so clumsy. So that would suggest that they really were a kind of ruling elite of the alien group. But what I've always told people is, we know we're dealing with people who do genetic engineering. And we also know we're dealing with people who, a great deal of what we see in contacts with them is what they want us to see. And so it's quite possible that they would create a group of beings that look like they're reptilians just for effect, just to see what effect it would have on the psychological reaction of human beings. So they may have, the quote-unquote reptilians may have a deep history with the aliens we're dealing with, or they may be just recently created, like dial-a-being, whatever you want.
Yeah. So you don't think
look like characters in a play,
Yeah.
Costumes. I'm not saying they're wearing costumes, but I mean, with their technology, they could actually create some sort of cadre for certain purposes that had certain appearances, just for the purposes of whatever task they might be assigned to at the time. It's very.
You don't think there's different breeds and of aliens, or
well,
are they all the same?
Again, they're doing genetic engineering, and since they are, why do we think of them like the word species is often used in connection with the aliens, and we have no basis for using it. A species, as we know it on Earth, is like a dog or a horse or a worm that is, shall we say, set in like a pattern of being what it is. There's no crossovers. It's an isolated biological theme of gods, the theme of horse, the theme of worm, and they're in like little, they're separate from other species. But the aliens, I mean, how many accounts do we have of them presenting babies and older and adults who are apparently hybrids? So they're taking human genetic material, and what are they matching it up with? We don't know, of course, what they're matching it up with, but they're creating some other people who are seemingly, I mean, I don't want to be glib about this because we really don't know for sure, seemingly are half human and half something else. Now, if they can do that, again, why should we call them species? Because they could all be, again, like the reptilians might be, creations. Engineered, biological engineered creations. We just don't know. What we do know is what they do. it's very interesting to see what they look like. I mean, we all are interested in that. But what's really important is what they do, you see. And a case like Jim Sparks, well, that's an example of what they do. And that's what's important to me.
And do you think they're all evil, though? I mean, do you think that they're as a whole, they're out to get us? Or do you think
I never
that there's
use
a
that
nice,
word.
gentler breed?
I never use that word evil.
Okay.
I regard them as a foreign nation, like a foreign country. And every foreign country has interests. That is to say, national interests, things that their nation wants to accomplish. Like if we go and talk to the French, they've got their things that they want to do for the French people. And the aliens have things they want to do for the aliens. And the question is what they want to do for themselves going to benefit us? And I mean, we don't. I have reason to think that it won't, but we don't know. But here's what we do know. We know that human rights are being massively violated. You see, and I don't believe that we can get to a good place. The place we're at now, our rights are being massively violated. Now, I don't believe that we can get from here to a good place. It's like we can't get there from here. What we have to do is get this stopped. And then
it's not just our country, right? They're all over.
Yes.
They're seeing them all over Mexico.
All over the world. That's right.
Yeah.
And we have to get this stopped. And if we can get it stopped and get it to where our rights are being respected by our own governments and by the aliens, then maybe we can get to a good place.
So
but right now they're treating us like, blank, 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 blank. I can't say those words over the air. They're treating us like really badly. Really badly.
Well, we have a guest in our chat room, Athena, and she was talking about the CIA and how they're downloading stuff into our brains, and she calls it the Green Star program or the MK Ultra or the Blue Beam Project. Have you heard of that?
Well, there are MK Ultra is a term that came out in the 1970s. It was a real program, and parts of it we're learning a lot more about it now than we learned in the 70s. But in the 70s, it came out that the CIA was giving people LSD to see what would, how they would react.
And,
yeah,
I remember.
But there's a lot more books about it now, talking about the kinds of mind control experiments that the CIA or other agencies of the U.S. government have been doing. And most significantly, there are the reports from the abductees that claim they're being apprehended, kidnapped, taken, abducted by people who are people and not aliens. And this is not. It seems to me that both aliens and people are abducting us. Both. And that means that we are being confronted with very powerful forces who have absolutely no respect for our human rights. And that is very, 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 very bad. And we've got to do something about it.
And what can we do? I mean,
we can
really
take to the streets. That's what we can do. And we did it. We started doing it in the 90s. You mentioned when you were kind enough to introduce me that I was an organizer for an organization called Operation Right to Know, which we ended up shutting down that organization after a while. But we did demonstrations. We got out in the street and yelled and screamed and carried signs and had press conferences and got in the newspapers saying that UFOs are real, they're extraterrestrial, and the U.S. government knows it. And today we could add up add another slogan in there, which would be "Stop the Abductions." And you see, the way that this, the advent, the arrival of the aliens has been treated by our society is really remarkable. Most Americans have more than an inkling that UFOs are real and that they're extraterrestrial. This idea is not something that you just stop anybody on the street and scratch the surface, and it'll come out that they have a notion that UFOs are real and they're extraterrestrial. However, that's where it stops.
Mhm.
We seem to have some sort of a unspoken agreement with our government that we're not going to really bring it up. Okay, we're not going to really press the issue. We're going to keep quiet about it, no matter what we.
Well, I think because you're ridiculed, you bring it up. Like people think you're crazy.
Ridicule is a very important key to how we're being kept silent about this. The fear of ridicule is used by all of us. When people are made fun of because they bring up UFOs, that's a way